All right, I think we are recording. So this is James Orr, and I am joined tonight by who's on the call with me?
Jason Bowman.
What? Jason Bowman is here. That's amazingly crazy cool. So Jason's going to join us tonight, and we're going to go over Catch Up Nomad. And you'll notice on the screen, normally we have PowerPoint presentation up, and tonight we are doing something very different. We are going to be going over primarily the Catch Up Nomad business model, and I'm going to show you how to do your own numbers on the Nomad calculator. And it just so happens that the Nomad, the Catch Up Nomad model is basically how to do Nomad when you're a 40-year-old, 45-year-old, 50-year-old person. You wake up one morning and you realize, oh my goodness, I do not quite have the amount of money I need in my account in order to fund my retirement, and I need to get caught up right away. And so a lot of times that's like, 40-year-old-ish people, they kind of have that realization after a little while. And Jason, how old are you?
39.
39. So the 39-year-old, we're going to go run his numbers on the calculator tonight. But the great news is you will learn tonight how to go use the calculator, how to enter in your own numbers, and how to do these calculations on your own. I will also tell you that right now, the calculator is completely unlocked and available to everybody, and I'm going to show you how to access that here in a minute. However, I know. However, there will be some changes coming. This weekend, I'm supposed to go on a special, what I call the Nomad Retreat. And at the Nomad Retreat, I'm supposed to think about what I'm doing with Nomad, moving forward here, some changes we're going to make, and I'm going to be discussing with some people, probably Jason and some other people, whether or not to include certain things open to the public versus certain things being locked down versus other things in there. And so that's going to be a pretty big part of the discussion this weekend on my Nomad Retreat. So what I'm leaning toward doing is making the overwhelming majority of the classes we've had so far open to the public, and then locking down certain other things for Nomad premium content and having sponsors be able to gift premium access to their clients, which is what I do here locally in our market. So we basically teach these classes or versions of these classes live on Wednesday nights, because we do the Wednesday live classes, and then I give clients access to the Nomad Premium. So Jason, you have any insight on that?
Yeah, I've kind of been dragging you kicking and screaming, I think, in a particular direction in regards to this. And so I think you pretty much know where I stand and what I would like to see you do with it in terms of spreading the word.
Yeah, so do you think I should unlock the content?
I think you should unlock the content. I also think that you and I should travel across the country.
That's just because you like me and you want me to hang out with you. That's all.
Well, no, seriously, that is part of it, sure. But also, getting out there and being evangelical about spreading the word about this investment model.
Yeah.
Because, in all seriousness, I did wake up at the age of 37 without a dime in my retirement accounts and going, oh crap, what am I going to do?
Yeah.
Because I'm one of those people that doesn't believe that I will ever in my life collect a dime of Social Security.
Well, that's probably true too.
And not that you should rely on it anyway.
I don't think you do. I think you eliminate that from your calculation. If you get any, it's a bonus.
Correct.
That's like your dining out budget.
Yeah, exactly.
Which some people think is crazy, but.
Well, I know. But from that perspective, and as somebody like yourself that spends $900 a month eating out,
it's only I spent $900. I think it's more than that.
I'm sure it is.
Yeah.
But yeah, it is something that needs to be considered.
Yeah, I agree with you. Okay, so with that being said, I am on the homepage of the website right now. I want to show you, because normally we go over the upcoming classes. I want to show you where the upcoming classes are usually listed. So if you go to the homepage, on the left-hand side, there's some links. I've been playing around with what should be included here versus what should not be included here. And right now, if you click on local meetups and classes, and you click on that link, it takes you to this page, which is Meetup Catch Up Nomad Overview. That's tonight's class. Gives you the class's description for tonight. Tells you can register to attend there. You can click RSVP in order to get on the webinar. If you're not on already, I'm not sure how you're going to see this. I guess the videos will be up, so you'll be able to see this. You can watch last week's video. And then if you want to attend your local Nomad Investor Meetup chapter meeting, you can RSVP for that right here and go there. But here's the upcoming calendar. And this calendar has been posted since before January when I put out the calendar for the entire year. And so next week, we're going to be analyzing a deal, Brian's spreadsheet. I will tell you, if you don't attend any other class, attend that class. It's going to be amazing. I mean, we're going to walk through Brian's spreadsheet. You will know much more about how to analyze a deal, an individual deal, not like the Nomad model where you're analyzing 10 properties over 40 years. But you'll learn how to analyze a deal. We'll talk about cash on cash return, which is my primary indicator. And we'll go over a ton of detail on that. And I will actually show you how to get a copy of Brian's spreadsheet. It's completely free.
Hey, James, your audio volume just dropped by about 80%.
Really? Can you hear me now?
Yeah, I can still hear you. It's just, you sound like you're much farther away.
Really? What about now? Went down a lot?
Yeah, it's still down. So I can still hear you, but it's very faint now.
Let me check my audio options and see.
It's actually happened before in past sessions. I've just never said anything.
Oh, okay. So I'll tell you what, according to the mic, it's still pretty good here. Let me go ahead and crank up my recording device input volume and see. Testing 1, 2, 3. I think it's this one. Properties. Listen, levels. Is that any better?
Oh, yeah. There we go.
That's a lot better?
Yeah. That's what it was like 3 minutes ago. Now we're back.
How about now?
That's fine.
Okay. Yeah, if it goes again, let me know and I'll readjust it. So getting back to the presentation, thank you for sticking with us through some technical difficulties. Here we go. Back now to our scheduled programming. So we got analyzing a deal with Brian's spreadsheet. That's coming up on May 2nd. And then I'll show you how to get the spreadsheet. You'll get a copy you can download if you use it with Excel. You can analyze your own deals in your market, wherever it is. Then the week after that, we're going to talk about capital expenses, which is often abbreviated CapEx. And we call it the silent killer. Actually, the name I stole from Brian's presentation. Brian did this presentation originally, probably a couple years ago now. And on that particular one, he talked about the capital expenses and how it kills deals. And we're going to address that in a lot of detail and how to overcome it by using lease options and things of that nature. Next class after that on May 16th, which happens to be my wedding anniversary. So I will be spending my wedding anniversary, my 22nd wedding anniversary with you all, because it's the most fun thing I can think of to do on May 16th. Is to hang out with you guys teaching Nomad stuff.
You know, you spent Valentine's Day with all of us as well. I'm starting to sense a trend here.
Yes, that is true. So we're doing both Valentine's Day and my wedding anniversary. This may be the last year. I mean, the 22nd thing where I decide to celebrate my own wedding anniversary. This may be my very last year married. So we shall have to see about that. I don't think that's going to happen. Knock on wood somewhere. But, I think I will spend it with you guys. So that's May 16th. We're going to talk about Nomad with lease option exit overview. And then we're going to do Analyzing Deals 201, where we talk about how it differs when you start analyzing your deal, thinking you were going to be selling it on a lease option. And we're going to tie that back into how it deals with doing the Nomad model, because one of the things we talk about is using Nomad with lease option. The other thing we talk about is if you have extra money to do more than just the 10 property plan, one of the great things I recommend doing is doing additional lease option deals. It actually turns out to be much better numbers, and I could talk to you about the details of that during that presentation. Then you can, of course, see the rest of the presentation list on here. The old classes as to what happened already. I don't have a place to see that yet. Maybe I should make a note to do that, huh? It's probably a good idea to be able to see what classes. Past classes for Nomad. Maybe what I'll do is I'll add it to the bottom of this page, and I'll link directly to the page that has the recording, especially if we're going to make them open to the public. Okay, so Jason, let's set the tone for today's class, right? You're 37 years old. You wake up in a cold sweat, and you say to yourself, oh my gosh, Jason, what have you been thinking this whole time? You are nowhere near where you need to be for retirement. Is that correct?
Correct.
And so what did you think of? What was the thought process going through your mind? What was your plan?
Well, for folks that don't know, that haven't been on a prior class, I went bankrupt in 2008.
Okay.
And started life completely over. A couple years before that, I had a divorce. So at the age of 30, I was literally in Chapter 7 bankruptcy, living in my car, and started over in a completely new career field in the tax world. Okay. So that was me at the age of 30. And so after, working my way through the bankruptcy and trying to, in some ways, return to normalcy for a couple of years, I actually ended up traveling the world for a few years because I figured, hey, if I'm going to be homeless, I might as well go someplace cool, right?
So saith you, by the way.
What's that?
So saith you. I'm not sure that would have been the first thing on my list.
But, I discovered that it was cheaper to live in youth hostels in foreign countries than to rent an apartment in big cities in America.
Yeah.
And so it actually helped me financially to do that. And I was living a pretty awesome life to boot that I can talk about now. Yeah. But then once I got back to the States and in what was that, 2014, and I did a seminar tour and all that, yeah, it dawned on me. I'm like, what am I going to do? Yeah. Like, I don't have a plan for not just retirement, but kind of life in general.
Yeah, I can't handle I can solve a lot of things for you. That is one day I cannot solve.
Yeah, but I had no retirement savings, right? I had, I had some cash and my credit was finally improving, right? So there were some options that were opening up to me. I had a stable income for the first time in, quite honestly, probably my entire life.
Well, you're in the military. You got a stable income then.
No, that they forgot to pay me for 6 months, right?
I forgot about that story. That's true.
Remember?
Yes, I do remember.
That was the first time I lived in my car.
Yeah.
Okay? So, yeah, I've always had a weird relationship with money. I've never taken financial planning and savings and all that stuff seriously. And, when you hit your late 30s, you just kind of start to realize, yeah, I got to fix myself.
So when you did this, when you were thinking about this, did you run the math of how much money you need to set aside in order to hit whatever your magical retirement money number was? Did you run the math on that?
Yeah, I did. And I ran two very different scenarios. Okay. One is the I'll call it the financial planner approach. Okay. And a financial planner will sit down with you, look at your current income, expenses, your current lifestyle, your standard of living, and they'll look at how much money you need in your nest egg at the age of 65 or 70 or whatever the end goal is there.
Right.
And say you need this much in the bank, and by using the magical number of a 4% withdrawal rate, plus an assumption about the stock market, to maintain your current standard of living, you need this much money. Okay. And for a lot of people, it ends up being, in the multiple millions of dollars.
Okay.
Right. Then there's another approach that I took, which was looking at more my lifestyle model, assuming I stayed single, and didn't go all crazy, and I kind of kept where I was, okay, which produced a significantly lower dollar number. Okay. But then I had a conversation with you. Remember? Well, maybe not. We've had a billion of them.
That's what I was going to say. It was like we've had tons and tons of conversations. I don't remember this one in particular.
But it was a conversation about cash flow.
Okay.
Right? About the cash flow that I need in retirement, and comparing that to the quote-unquote financial planner model and approach. Okay. And so when you look at it from a cash flow standpoint, which is really what's important, it starts to change, right? And so you started saying, well, there's another way to get that cash flow.
And there is another way. That's a big transition. So what's the other way?
The other way is Nomad.
That's right.
Nomad. Mammoths will make your path.
Okay. So basically what Nomad is, because we don't have a slide for it. Oh, we do have a slide for it. So what is Nomad? You click on the link here, and it pops it up here and basically says Nomad is buy a home as an owner occupant, live there for a year, then buy a new home and convert the previous one to a rental and repeat this process until you reach your financial goals. Okay.
Right.
And again, we're moving into the properties so that we can get very good owner occupant financing. We won't have to come up with 15 or 20 or 25% down, depending on the types of properties, types of loan programs we're doing. A lot of times we can buy our first property like Jason has done. He bought his first property with nothing down, a VA loan. Second property also with a VA loan, nothing down. But even people that aren't veterans can buy their first property with 1% down, 0% down if you're willing to buy a USDA approved property outside of city limits usually. But even inside city limits, you can buy properties with 1% down. And then the subsequent properties after, the first one or two, because the second one you can do 3% down usually, and the third one a lot of times you can do 3% down. But after that, you could do 5% down for anyone's additional up to number 10. And one of the things we don't talk about, we talk about in the Financing 101 class, which you guys can go access and watch that whole 2-hour class in financing. One of the things we do talk about is alternating between spouses. So, Jason, if you were married, you could basically alternate with your spouse. You could do one property at 1% down. Your spouse could do one property at 1% down. Then you could do 3%. She could do 3%, 3%, 3%, then 5, 5, 5, 5, 5, up until you get to a combined 10 each, 20 total. So you could do that way too in order to minimize how much you need to put down. And it's significantly less than if you actually don't move into the properties, don't get owner-occupant financing with slightly better interest rates, and you put up 15, 20, 25% down in order to acquire similar rental properties.
Right.
Okay, so that is the What is Nomad section. Let's go right now to the Nomad Calculator Classic. And I'll give you a little bit of background on Nomad Calculator Classic. If you click on the link here, it takes you to the calculator, which we're going to go into a lot of detail tonight. If you have additional questions about the calculator, I put together a list of calculator FAQs. So you click this little down arrow thing, and it shows you the Nomad calculator, which is, what is it? Why do you call it classic? How do you access it? What numbers do you typically enter? It's basically, a dozen or 2 dozen frequently asked questions about how to use the calculator. You're welcome to use that sort of like an online instruction manual in some ways, based in frequently asked question format. But tonight what I'd like to do with you, Jason, is I'd like to actually put in some of your home assumptions, your numbers for your assumptions, knowing that the people watching can go ahead and run their own numbers. They can either open up another browser window and do it, while they're listening to this particular presentation and see how their numbers kind of work and what the impact is in their market. But I'd like to run numbers with you because I don't think I've ever run your numbers with you, and I'd like to give you some feedback as if you were a client of mine. You're not a client of mine, you're in a different market, but I'm willing to do that for you and tell you kind of how I think about this, how the calculator was built, and how I interpret some of the numbers and charts in here. So is that okay with you if I do that?
Absolutely. And let's face it, I basically am a client. I probably should send you a $5,000 check every year because I bend your ears so much. So,
I did, my birthday's coming up. I did send you a very nice birthday gift that you could, if you wanted to, reward me with this very, very nice birthday gift.
You know what? Well, for everybody listening, what he sent me was a link to a very nice massage chair on Amazon.
Yeah.
And just to tell you, here's what I ended up doing.
You bought one for yourself?
No.
Oh.
Close.
What did you do?
It took me down a magical rabbit hole of Amazon. Okay. And there's these things called shiatsu massage pillows.
Oh, yeah.
It arrived literally 20 minutes before we started the webinar, and I'm using it right now.
So what is it? It's like a pillow you put on your chair?
Yeah. It's got the little rolling hand things in the infrared heat, and it was your idea. Thank you.
You're very welcome. So if you did want to voluntarily buy me a birthday gift, you could buy that, but it's not required, as you well know. Okay. So getting back to the calculator. So what this calculator does, and as an aside, I call it Nomad Calculator Classic because I basically built this thing. We built a spreadsheet. I tell the story in the lease option book, but I'll tell you it again very briefly. I was out at my best friend Brian's house with my other best friend Royce, and we were basically having a conversation about Royce doing this Nomad model. But we didn't call it Nomad at the time. It was like so brand new that he was just saying, so this is the model I want to do. I want to buy properties, a little down, live in the property, kind of convert them to rental properties. So I'm like, yeah, the math on that is pretty amazing. Have you ever run numbers on it? And, I made a little spreadsheet or whatever he told me. I don't forget now. And I said, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to run home and I'm going to build a spreadsheet that cascades buying one property, waiting a year, buying another one with a little bit higher purchase price, and look what happens over 10 years of buying these properties with, at the time, I think we were remodeling with 5% down. And so we will go do this whole model. And so I ran home, I built the spreadsheet. I had the original email I sent to both Brian and Royce after I built it, and Tammy, saying, hey, here's a spreadsheet I built. The numbers are fantastic. They're like amazingly good. And so we started modeling it and addressing all the questions and meeting with lenders and working through the challenges and figuring out how to do basically Nomad. And we kind of named it Nomad because we wanted to be able to describe that you're moving into the house and then living there for a year and then moving into another one. And so I didn't invent the idea of buying a property, living in it for a year and converting it to a rental, but we did do a freaking ton of math on it. And I'm going to show you a lot of that math tonight. And we built a spreadsheet and then we built the calculator. But as soon as I started programming the calculator, because I knew the spreadsheet had a lot of limitations. Number one, it didn't make all the cool charts without, having all sorts of tabs and funky stuff. And I wanted to be able to write presentations and, what happens if interest rates are going up. And there was a whole bunch of modeling I wanted to do. But as soon as I started building the calculator, I knew right then that I had to build a very different one in the future. And so I immediately started calling this one the classic one, because the one that I'm going to build is going to be all database driven. Each individual property is going to have all of its own characteristics. You're going to be able to say on one of them, I put 20% down. It took me 13 months to buy it. And I had an ARM interest rate, a variable rate loan, and, there's a balloon on it. And we're going to be able to do like amazingly crazy modeling of the Nomad model, of the Nomad kind of purchase pool for you, and track all of your expenses and allow you to sell properties and buy new ones and do lease options and see how your portfolio would look if you added additional property. So there's all sorts of crazy stuff that's coming in what I'm going to be calling the next Nomad calculator, or the Nomad calculator 2.0. I forget what I call the new one. But I started doing some really rough drafts, like, outlining of what I'm going to do code-wise in my little journal here when I go and I sit down at McDonald's or Qdoba or wherever I'm eating at, and I start to make notes. But for now, what you have is the Nomad Calculator Classic. And I will tell you, without exaggeration, I have never seen a calculator like this before. Jason, have you ever seen one? You're kind of a freak about going online and finding all sorts of websites and tools that can do analysis. Have you ever seen one like this?
You know what? There are a ton of investment calculators out there, mortgage calculators. Bigger Pockets has a ton of scenario engines and stuff like that. Nothing like this, though.
Yeah, so this is like a deal analysis calculator on steroids. It is, yes. But it's very specific, has a very narrow focus. The narrow focus is it pretends you're buying essentially the same property every year for 10 years, and then you're holding them for 40 years until they're all paid off.
Right.
So it's only doing that very specific calculation, but it does that calculation really, really well, and it shows you a lot of insight as to how it all works and what the analysis looks like. So
yeah, I think it's important for folks to understand that. I mean, you already said it, but just to be very clear, if they're looking to do any kind of creative real estate investing, if they're looking to do, subject to and wholesaling and stuff like that, this has nothing to do, period, with any of that kind of stuff.
Yeah, and I've taught that before. There's a period of time when I was teaching that a lot, and I've done a ton of creative stuff. However, that's not what Nomad is. Nomad is the ability to go buy properties, from the largest selection of properties. So you're buying the highest quality properties that you can find that are kind of in your price range and criteria. And we talk about that. We have a 2-hour video just on, types of properties to buy and how to look at properties, how to analyze them, and everything else. There's like multiple classes just on that. But this is really about buying those bread and butter properties in the MLS and buying them one a year using owner financing, living them for a year, converting them to rentals, and acquiring a portfolio of rental properties, which is what I'm going to show you tonight. Okay. So let's jump right into the calculator, and we're just going to start making some assumptions about your particular deal stuff. Jason, can you see this screen pretty well? Because I zoomed in a little tiny bit.
Yep.
Okay, if I have to zoom out, I'll go ahead and do that. But basically what you do is you pull up the page, you go click on Nomad Calculator Classic, it pulls up this page on here, or something that looks just like this, because I may make some modifications in the future. And then we're going to put in what the initial home purchase price is of properties for you right now. So Jason, you bought a couple of properties with Nomad. What are the 2 purchase prices of properties you bought?
The first house was 145. The second house was 180.
Okay, and were they duplexes or single-family homes?
The first one was a duplex. Second one was single family.
So the more expensive one was single-family home?
Correct.
Okay, so let's model that.
Okay.
So we're going to use about 180 for your purchase price in that property. In your market, do you know what the appreciation rate is? Do you know what property values are going up approximately on average?
Recent or like?
That's a great question. So it's what I like to use is a very long-term average.
Right.
Is it possible that property values in your market could go down 10% next year?
Absolutely.
Is it possible they could go up 10% next year?
They will.
Yeah. So the idea, though, is, since we're looking at a 40-year time horizon, I don't want to use an appreciation rate. Oh, I had a spelling mistake. It says appreciation rate. I should make a note to myself. Spelling error on calculator appreciation. All right. So I was saying, though, we want to use an appreciation rate over a very long period of time.
Right.
Because we're going to be modeling this over a 40-year time period. If you use 10%, which may be what you're seeing in your local marketplace, the last couple of years, if we use a 10% appreciation rate, our numbers are going to be so optimistic because it's going to think that you're seeing 10% per year for a full 40-year period. And those numbers look crazy good. In fact, if you remind me, we can go back in and plug in what it looks like. Not that we're really expecting those numbers to exist, but we can do it just for fun at the end. I'll come back. We could put in some crazy appreciation rate to see what happens, but don't use that. I will tell you, we do an entire 2-hour class on appreciation rates. And the appreciation rate over a very long period of time is about what inflation is. In fact, the Case-Shiller index shows over a 100-year plus period that the appreciation rate for housing over a 100-year period, over all the markets in the United States, tends to be approximately inflation. I think it's like the difference between 3% and 3.1. So I like to use 3%. Are you okay with me using that?
I am.
Okay, good. So we've used 3% for that. What is the rent you're getting on that $180,000 property? You're living in it right now. But
I live in it, yeah.
What do you think it's going to be like next year? Or what do you think it's going to be this year if you were to rent it out right now?
So if I were to rent it out right now, probably 1,300 to 1,400 range.
Okay. Do you want to use 1,300? We can go modify it to be 1,400 a little later.
Yeah, model it for conservative.
Okay. So let's use 1,300 for your rent right there. What is rent appreciation rate? I will tell you that I have charts showing over a very long period of time that rents and home prices tend to actually model each other. They tend to keep level. There are definitely times when rents will rise above and they'll go up faster than home prices will go up. And there are other times when home prices will go up faster than rents. But if you look at a long enough time horizon, rents and property values tend to be about where they're going up at about the same rate. So I'd like to suggest that we use a rent appreciation as the same as the home appreciation. If you're okay with that, let's use 3.
I'm gonna go ahead and let you use 3, but just so that everybody knows, research this for your own local market. If I was doing this on my own, in actuality, I'd plug in 5 because of a lot of local factors and the fact that we're getting a tremendous amount of pushover or spillover rather from the Seattle market into my market, which is driving our both home prices and rent prices up faster than normal, going back years and projecting ahead at least a decade.
Okay, so here's how I would adjust for that. See, this is what's great about being able to do this with you live and recording it.
Sure.
So if you think that you're going to see a period of stronger rent appreciation in the thing, realize that this number gets compounded over 40 years.
Correct.
So I still wouldn't use 5. What I might do, though, I might be willing to go ahead and put in a 3% rent appreciation, but I would tend to use a little bit more aggressive number on our rent to begin with.
Okay.
So instead of using the 13, I probably would be closer. I'd be tempted to use more like the 14, but I would still use the 3% appreciation.
Great.
That's how I would personally do it, and why I would do it that way is because later on, this 3% has a huge impact.
Correct.
If you use 5% and now in year 20 or year 30 or year 35, you're seeing a 5% compounding rate of rent appreciation, it gets really, really gnarly large in your favor because it happens to be rent later on, which I don't think is realistic. I think it's more realistic for you to say, okay, I'm getting 1,400 now. which is probably a stretch as to what I might be able to get. Maybe it's even 1450, but I want to use the 3% to be a little bit more conservative.
Well, it's interesting. If I put this house as is on the rental market today, as in today, I'd get the 1400.
Okay, so let's use 1400. And the other thing, I want to point out something to you. When you rented your duplex, I remember us having a pretty late night conversation.
Oh, yeah.
And you thought, renting my duplex is going to be whatever the number was. And then you started doing some research as to what rent comps were. You're like, I'm off by hundreds of dollars low.
Correct.
And then you found out that when you put it up on the market, you got a ton of response of qualified people applying, and that you really were low. And you probably were low with the higher number.
Well, what happened is that I bought the house with a tenant in the other side of the duplex, and I moved into the 1-bedroom unit. And the tenant that was in there, he had been in there for 6 years when I bought the house, and he was at 6.25, which when I bought the place was a couple $100 a month low for a 2-bedroom. Rents have gone up so much in the past 2 years here locally. We've hit closer to 10, 12% per year rent increases locally.
Yeah.
The past few years. And so I've got him at $750 right now. January 1st next year, I'll probably bump him to another, $50 or $75, but he's still going to be way below market rent. But I'm okay with that because he's a stable tenant, reliable, etc. Yeah. The 1-bedroom side, 1-bedroom instead of the 2-bedroom, I thought I'd get $700 for it. Okay. I found plenty of comps in the $900 to $1,000 range. I ended up I put it out at $895, and I had it filled within a week.
Yeah. Yeah, and we're going to do whole classes on tenant screening and market rent analysis and stuff like that. But for tonight, let's pretend we've got a rent appreciation. You're going to use your initial rent of $1,400, and your rent appreciation is 3%. So we'll use that for tonight. Now, when you closed on your property, did you get the seller to pay for closing costs?
No. There are limits on seller concessions for VA loans, and also I was more interested in negotiating on price and keeping my total loan amount lower. That was more of interest to me, and so I didn't seek seller concessions. Also, on each property, the sellers did $4,000 or $5,000 worth of work to bring the house up to VA standards as well. And I knew that going in that was going to be part of the issue. So I took that into consideration when I made my offers.
So on the next property you're going to buy, which is probably not going to be VA, right?
It will be probably conforming at this point.
Yeah, and so it's probably not going to be a VA loan. So what I'm going to suggest you do is when you go to negotiate your offer, you ask the seller to contribute part of your purchase price in closing costs. And so, this 180, I'm going to say 2% of that, or about, $3,600. I'm going to ask that you get them to pay those in closing costs. And so we're going to bump up the price by $3,600.
Okay.
And then I'm going to say that you're getting about 2% back toward closing costs. You're really going to finance in your closing costs by raising the price, then asking the seller to contribute basically 2% back toward closing costs. Now, is it exactly 2% because I just raised it by 183, 3,000? No, it's not exact, but it's really close. And I think the math we're doing, the numbers are going to be large so that this is going to be a relatively small difference, okay? And then I'm also assuming that the total amount of your seller concessions is going to be equal to your closing costs. Now, you may take some of your closing costs, like some of the loan financing fees and everything, you may take that by having a slightly higher interest rate, not buying down the interest rate by paying points, but having the lender give you either the par rate or a rate that you get a little bit of a credit back to cover some of those. And if in your market, closing costs are usually 3% or something like that, go ahead and use your number. In our market here in Northern Colorado, I'm using 2%, and I'm going to use that for Jason unless he tells me otherwise.
No, you're fine.
Okay. So mortgage, down payment amounts. Now, the first two properties you did were 0% down. Correct. But I'm going to pretend that we're going to use 5% for all 10 properties to show you what it would look like if you had done 5% down. Remember at the beginning I told you I'm going to do this, advanced Nomad calculator where we're going to have each property have its own down payments and own closing costs and own loan and everything like that. You'll see that when we do this calculator, we have to say that we're assuming the same down payment percentage for all 10 properties that we purchase. And so that's why this one's classic, and the other one is going to be the more advanced one, where you can put down in the interest rate for each one and do basically its own little database model for each one. It's really what it's going to come down to. So in this case, we're going to assume 5% down payment, and then your loan interest rate. Do you know what your interest rate? Let me see what interest rates are for today.
The house I'm in right now, I'm at 4 1/8.
Okay, that's a VA loan though, right?
Yeah, and also I locked right after the interest rate spike after the election.
Okay.
The Trump effect.
So VA today is 3.75.
Oh, don't tell me that.
The FHA rate for today is 3.75 as well.
Okay.
And the 30-year fixed rate with a 740 credit score with 20% down is 4.375.
Okay.
I get texted every morning from one of the lenders I work with, and they send over the rates. And so that's nice. One of the things. So what I'm going to do, though, is I'm going to assume that we are going to roll in to your interest rate the PMI part of the payment. So you're going to take basically monthly PMI in your rate. So the rate we would have had for the conventional loan, if you had put 20% down, was 4.375. So instead of doing that, I'm going to actually assume it's either 4.5 or 4.625. And just to make it a little bit more conservative, I'm going to use the higher end.
Okay.
I think the possibility of interest rates going up is likely over the next decade, which is where we're going to use this interest rate for buying properties. Right. Would you give me that?
Yeah.
Okay.
And for folks that are listening to this in the future and that are looking at the VA side of things, don't forget about the VA funding fee, which is essentially PMI paid up front, and you can either pay it out of pocket or roll it into the loan. Yep. For house number 1, I rolled it into the loan. For house number 2, I paid the funding fee out of pocket at closing.
Yeah. So I'm going to use 4.625, but call your own lender and ask them, hey, listen, I'm going to put a 5% down payment on the house or whatever down payment you're going to do, and I want to find out what my interest rate would be today with my credit score on a whatever purchase price of house you're looking at doing, and they will be able to give you the interest rate and tell them you want to have PMI included in your interest rate. So you want them to give you a bump in interest rate such that you can get either a big enough credit to do an upfront PMI payment, or you'll take the PMI as a monthly with the interest rate. And they'll be able to give you the number to use for your interest rate by doing that. It's especially helpful if you know a lender that focuses on working with nomads.
Yeah.
Okay. All right, so continuing on though. Interest rate 4.625. Jason, do you have an HOA on your house?
Absolutely freaking not.
Okay. If you did have an HOA, let's say your HOA was, $50 a month or something like that.
No. Never.
$50 times 12, and you'd have $600 a year for your HOA. As an aside, Jason's being funny, but
no, I'm being pretty serious. Actually,
he's very averse to.
Yes.
He's very averse to HOAs. HOAs are not necessarily an automatic bad thing. Okay?
Right.
So just be prepared that if you have an HOA, it's not the end of the world. There's some benefits to doing them. And in our market, half the properties that sell have HOAs. So Jason doesn't have.
Well, let me point this out. You've kind of got me convinced to start looking at new construction, which is not something I've ever really considered before.
Yeah.
And especially because there's not a whole lot of new construction in my area. But literally, housing starts here in the past 6 months in my local area have skyrocketed, again, because of the spillover all of a sudden from Seattle and the housing crisis in downtown Seattle, and we have the ferry and all that. So it's now an option around here, and there are builders that are coming over here from the Seattle side that are buying land and building starter homes. Mm-hmm. And most of them, they don't have the super expensive HOAs with that cover all the insurance and landscaping and everything. They have like the cheaper HOAs that are like a couple $100 a year.
Sure.
Right? And those don't seem so bad.
Okay. So if you really are doing those, can you buy one of those for $180?
Closer to, more like 2.25.
All right, so let's do this. Let's run your numbers on what we're doing here. But I'd like to go back, if we have time afterward, and pump in $225 and put in like a $300 a year HOA.
All right.
Okay, but for now, let's do what we have. Okay.
All right.
So we're doing $0 a year for HOA And since it doesn't matter, we're going to use 3% for the HOA appreciation rate, but 3% of 0 is still 0.
Right.
Okay. Property insurance rate. Do you know what your insurance costs you on that property?
Yeah, it is $110 a month.
So your insurance on the property is $110 a month times 12 divided by 180,000. So it's about 0.73 in your market. Okay. Do you know what your property taxes are?
1 point. Hang on. I can give you an actual number.
Okay. So while you're doing that calculation, I'm going to tell people what I did with property insurance. So what I basically did is I figured out he was paying $110 a month, and I multiplied that by 12, and I got $1,320. That's the yearly insurance premium he has on this property. And then I divide that by the purchase price of the property, the value in this case, and then I multiply that by 100 in order to figure out what the percentage is. So in this case, it works out to be 0.73% of the value of the property per year for the insurance. So what tends to happen is as property values go up, the insurance that you're paying each year goes up. And we're assuming that 0.73% of the property value is going to be consistent for the next 40 years. So as property values go up, the amount you pay for insurance goes up, but the percentage of the home value stays the same. What's the property taxes?
1% on the dot.
1% on the dot?
Yep.
So $180,000 property times 0.01 equals $1,800. So it's going to be $1,800. In this case, we know it's 1%. We're going to put in a 1% property tax rate. Now, here in our local market, the property insurance rate I tend to use is 0.5, which is conservatively high, okay? Our insurance rate is actually much lower here in Colorado. I just saw an insurance quote for a client, and I think that their insurance was actually like 0.35.
Wow.
On a property. So it's much lower, and that was an actual quote on a property they're buying right now, $360,000 property. Their insurance quote worked out to be like 0.35. And then our property taxes work out to be a little bit lower too. And now if I tell you what the numbers here, and you're from New York or Illinois or one of those other areas, you're going to be like, oh my gosh, James, you guys got so lucky. But yeah, we have really low taxes here in Colorado.
Right.
But
here in Washington, we don't have a state income tax. And so we have one of the highest, we're in the top 15 or so for property tax rates, and we're in the top 10 for sales tax.
Okay.
So they're going to get you somewhere. So take that in mind.
And for property tax here locally, one of the things I did is I did a chart going back to 1997, so 20 years worth of data, and I showed the ratio of property taxes to the home sale price. And if you use 0.65, it's a pretty good number for a long-term number for figuring out property taxes.
Okay.
So property management. Jason, are you going to be managing the property yourself, or are you going to have a property manager manage it?
So far, I've been doing my own property management, and that's the general Nomad assumption. However, there may be a career reason for me to soon start using a property manager. Yeah,
so for property management, I'm going to put in 0, assuming you're managing it yourself.
Yep.
What about for maintenance? How much of the monthly rent, your gross monthly rent, do you want to set aside for maintenance on the properties?
We've had this conversation before, and you don't like the way that I approach this.
So tell me what your number is. Tell me how you approach it.
So my maintenance reserve that I calculate in is 0. Don't
do that. I will tell everyone listening, please don't do that. But go ahead, explain your reasoning why you do 0.
So I make the assumption that, I'm going to occasionally have to do things. Like I had a $1,900 water heater problem last year, right?
$1,800 for your water heater?
Yeah.
Wow, that seems really high to me.
It was. Anyway, it was highway robbery.
Okay.
So I am making the assumption that repairs, including major repairs, are things that are going to pop up as a homeowner anyway, and that I just need to have a fund set aside with enough cash that is my maintenance reserve for all of my Nomad properties.
Okay. Everyone else listening, do not do that. So this is how you should do it. What you should do is you should say a certain amount of money from every rent check that comes in, the gross rent right off the top, you should set aside in the account that Jason has, that you should be funding that account with every rental property you have, and it should go into a fund to cover the maintenance expenses you have. Now, does it always cover 100% of a maintenance thing?
No.
No, it does not. It doesn't cover the overwhelming majority. Yes, I think that it should.
Yeah.
What it doesn't cover a lot of times is CapEx. So sometimes the line between maintenance on a property and CapEx gets a little bit blurred for a lot of folks. And so the numbers don't always match up. You don't have enough money in there for a roof or whatever it is. So you can go ahead and budget, in my opinion, for most single family homes, and of course, use whatever numbers you feel comfortable with in your marketplace. But for most single family homes, I think 12% is a good starting point for the number for the maintenance reserve. If you have a brand new home, you could use a little bit lower, but realize this is a 40-year number.
Right.
So as rents go up, you keep increasing how much you're putting into the property and how much maintenance is going to cost on properties and stuff like that. I will tell you that there are some pretty sophisticated investors I know that over a very large portfolio of properties are closer to 8% total. Mm-hmm. However, I think it's more conservative to use 12. So we're going to use 12 here and say that you have a big cash buffer for maintenance expenses. I'd rather see you flush with cash than short.
Right.
Okay. So we are calculating in maintenance money on the properties there. We just did property management with 0 from before. Now, these other assumptions, I'm not going to use many of these. For example, we have a class where we talk about, using Nomad in order to pay for college. And when we're doing this, we put in here what the yearly college cost is now, what the college appreciation rate is, how much college expenses are going up each year. We put in the stock market return. I am going to use this. So, Jason, if you were going to not do Nomad, you were going to take the same amount of money that you were used for Nomad, and you were going to put it in the stock market, what do you think realistically you could get as a consistent stock market return over the next 40 years? What percentage per year can you get over a 40-year time horizon?
I actually have a number for you.
Great, let's use it.
Because I did open an IRA, and I have put in the money for the past 2 years into it.
Well, 2 years is not 40.
No, I know that.
I could pick 2 years where the numbers look amazing.
No, but the number that I'm using to trend that is not 10%, which is what a lot of financial planners will tell you. The number I'm using is 7.
Okay, I'm not going to use 7. So the reason why, it's a very good reason why. I'm going to use what I consider to be an optimistic number, because I almost want Nomad to have like one hand tied behind its back when it's competing in the stock market, because I want you to say, hey, listen, I can get 10% in the stock market, which you probably can't, by the way. But I could get 10% in the stock market. I want you to think, all right, let's compete. Let's compare Nomad at 10%. I'm sorry, Nomad at whatever percentage it's going to do to stock market return getting 10% a year, which I think is optimistic. I think you'd be really lucky to do that over any prolonged period of time. So if you can do that, we're going to use 10% there in order to make that work. Okay, so 10% stock market return is what we're assuming, and we're going to show you some comparison charts in a little bit. Then income tax rate. Jason, we're going to use this to calculate depreciation, and you understand depreciation better than most people on the call because you do all this tax stuff, and I am not an expert on depreciation, taxes, and stuff like that. What do you think a reasonable effective income tax rate? This is the one that sums up all the tiers you're in. What do you think a good income tax rate to use is on average?
I am going to ask you to bump that number to 26.
Oh my gosh. Okay, so let's talk about this then, because I am constantly bumping this thing down, because I think the majority of people that are doing Nomad, they're not in the effective 26% tax bracket. I think that most of them, when you kind of add up that they're paying, 15% on the first, whatever the number is, and all that other stuff, they're closer to like 15 or 17 or 18 or whatever.
Most people doing this that are middle or middle upper income Americans, they're going to be closer to 18 to 20.
So let's be conservative, because you use a higher number, it makes the depreciation better, which makes Nomad look even better. So I'd rather be lower than higher.
Okay.
It's more conservative to be lower here, I guess is how I would say.
Correct. Yeah, from a depreciation standpoint.
Yes, and which that's the only thing we use it for. We're not using it in other calculations. So what do you think we should use? I don't think we should bump it up to 26 because that's going to make you look better with Nomad, and I'd rather be more conservative.
So kind of like the maintenance reserve, if I was actually crunching this,
you would use like 27% or something.
No, I would use 26 because that's my effective tax rate.
Oh, that's your actual number.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. So let's let's.
You said you wanted to model my actual numbers.
Actually, good point. So let's use. You happen to have your number. Let's use your number. If you actually have a tax return from last year, you can go look it up. A lot of times they put it right on the first page what your effective income tax rate was, and that's the number you want to use. And
so use your effective number, not your marginal tax rate. Understand the difference.
Yes, effective. So use 26 because that happens to be you. People watching this, though, I would recommend you use 20 or probably lower unless you happen to know your actual number.
Yeah.
Okay. So if you don't know, if you're guessing, let's use 18. Does that seem reasonable, Jason?
For the average person, 18 is going to be about roughly where they're at. Yeah.
Okay. So if you don't know what to use, plug in 18. If you happen to know yours, plug in yours. Okay. And then inflation rate. So I'm going to be talking about, when we look at these charts, right, we're going to say you're going to be making $500,000 a year in cash flow, but it's going to be, 30-something years in the future. And if I don't tell you, that's an inflated dollar amount, you're going to think it's $500,000 a year in today's dollars. And so sometimes for calculations, and I'm not sure I do it much on the Nomad, the Catch Up Nomad one, I do a whole class on inflation-adjusted numbers and how it works out. But we could say, listen, the inflation rate's 3%, so I could tell you that $500,000 27 years from now is really like making $130,000 a year in cash flow today.
Right.
Okay? And I'm going to talk to you a little bit about that, but we can do the actual math if you put in an inflation rate here.
Right.
And so I use 3% over a very long period of time. That tends to be what our inflation has been. Yep. Who knows what it's going to be in the future? For all I know, it could be 13%. Could be 0.3%. I don't know. But I use 3% as a good long-term average.
It's a good number. Most monetary policy decisions by the federal government are made to maintain a 2% inflation rate. That's the federal target. But, like last year we were at 2.1. This year we're on pace for about 2.3. And so, yeah, I think being conservative at 3% is going to, again, over the 40 years, is going to be probably about right.
Okay, that seems reasonable. And then here is one of the options. You could check the type of charts that you want to show here. Tonight we're doing Catch Up Nomad, but there's charts that are sort of specific for Legacy Nomad. There's an interest rate scenarios type chart. There's a little down payment type Nomad charts. There's the infographic charts. There's the college Nomad charts, appreciation, calibration, and the young Nomad charts. But we're really focused on Catch Up Nomad, so I'm going to leave it on that. I'm going to press the magical button. The computer whirls in the background, and all of a sudden pops up the same page with the same numbers at the top, except now there are charts below. Magical stuff. Okay. So what I'd like to do is just start walking through some of the charts and explaining to you what's going on and how it works. So one of the first charts you're going to come along is you're going to see a pie chart showing you what your kind of expenses are on the property. And I want to point out that you're living in the property for year one. So these are the rental property expenses for the first year you're renting it, which is year two. So it's your first property that you bought, and then in year two for that. And one of the nice things about being able to do this versus the slides is you get to see how interactive these charts are. So I'm going to turn off everything, and I'm going to slowly build the chart up. So
this is so slick.
You like that?
Well, you remember it was only a few months ago that I actually discovered that it could do all this. I didn't know that it existed until a couple months ago.
All right. So when you look at this, basically I'm just putting on property the mortgage payment amount, and that's right now that's 100%. If you add in property management, which there's nothing for that, you can add in the utilities, which I'm assuming the tenant is paying, but you could add those. Vacancy on the property. So we're assuming that the property is vacant. I think we use either 3% of the time or 5% of the time, and I want to comment on that. So sometimes when I say to people, hey, listen, we're using 3% vacancy, which means the property is vacant 1 month out of every 3 years, essentially. Okay? if you say that, a property is vacant 1 month out of every 3 years, there are some people that cry, "Oh, James, your numbers are all fake because having a 1 month vacancy every 3 years is unrealistically optimistic. There's no possible way you can have your property, only vacant 1 month out of every 3 years." And I'm going to yell BS on them. I'm going to pull out my BS flag from my back pocket. I'm going to tell you, if you're doing property management right, you should have less than 3% vacancy.
Yeah.
Even in crazy markets where there's a lot of vacancy. Here's why. When we teach this during property management, the time to rent your property is not after the tenant moves out. That's stupid. The time to rent your property is at least 60 days before the tenant moves out. You should be finding your tenant before the previous tenant moves out of the property, so your vacancy should be close to zero.
And by the way, can I add, from a nomad standpoint, think of yourself as a tenant and start looking for a renter for your property at least 60 days before you're ready to close on the next house and move out of the current one.
Absolutely.
I made that mistake and I paid dearly for it financially.
Yeah. And so you should not be having huge vacancies on your properties. I think it's a huge mistake. So we do set aside money for vacancy, and that shows you the amount of your monthly stuff coming in that is for maintenance, for a vacancy rather. This is the maintenance amount. This is your HOA. If we had an HOA, it would be in there. In this case, it's zero. This is your insurance, and then this is your property taxes. So you could see, one of the things I want to point out to you is that your mortgage payment makes up probably about 2/3, 64.96% of all of the expenses on your property. What's fascinating about this, though, is that the mortgage payment is fixed. So in year one, it is the same dollar amount as it is in year 15, 20, 22, 29. Okay? It doesn't change. All of these, though, do. So property taxes, they tend to increase, and it works out to be about 3% per year because that's what we use for the appreciation rate on the property. Your insurance goes up about 3% a year. If you had an HOA, it goes up about that. Your maintenance on the property goes up about whatever the rent appreciation is. The vacancy goes up about the same number. And if you had property management utilities, those would also go up by those numbers. So over time, this little 1/3 section of this expense chart goes up about 3% a year, but this one remains fixed. So that over time, the amount of your mortgage payment is actually getting smaller. Okay, it's shrinking because the other expenses are growing. But the other expenses are growing relatively slowly compared to the total amount of money you're coming in from appreciation, from rent appreciation. So if you kind of look at it, this is all of your expenses on the property without the mortgage payment. So it shows you insurance makes up about 23% of it, taxes are about 35%, maintenance is about 34%, vacancy is about 8.94% of all of your expenses, not including your mortgage payment. So I don't know if you've ever seen me do that chart before, Jason, but it is something that is pretty interesting to look at and see where the money is going, not counting your mortgage payment on your property.
Yeah, I like that.
Yeah, pretty cool, right? All right, so that's the first chart. You're welcome to play with that. You can move the things in. You can kind of pull these out here. If you want to do a screenshot, you can actually either print the chart or download it as a JPEG or PNG or PDF, whatever you want to do there. So you can use this in order to share it with your investor friends or your spouse or your financial advisor, your real estate agent, whoever you're using. So you can use all these charts to do that. You could turn off certain things or whatever you want to do. Okay.
Well, I'll caution, don't send this stuff to your financial advisor because all it's going to do is embarrass him.
I don't know. I've got a couple of financial advisor friends that are pretty sophisticated real estate guys.
Okay.
They're unusual, but they're pretty sophisticated real estate guys. Okay. Moving on to the next chart. So here's the value of the homes you're buying each year. So in year one, basically you bought a property that was $183,600. And that's what the property was approximately worth. Okay. And then in year two, basically imagine yourself buying another property in the same neighborhood for $189,108. Similar property, 3 streets over, which is not practical, by the way, but we're doing this as an example for explaining how you're buying these properties.
Actually, don't laugh. My neighbor told me he will be listing his house, and it's an identical floor plan almost. And it's actually a nice place. It's in better shape than mine. I may actually buy the house next door as my next property.
So I've had a couple clients want to do this before, and you need a very special lender who's willing to allow you to do it, because a lot of lenders, they need to see a benefit for buying another house And a lot of times buying right across the street doesn't give you enough benefit. So I had a client literally buy a house across the street from him, same exact floor plan, and we had to find a special lender to do it.
Huh. Okay.
It can be done, but it's definitely harder to do.
Interesting.
Yep.
Good to know.
There you go. I'm all sorts of useful information for you. So basically, each year you're buying this property for this value. What's interesting though is the property you bought in year one is also worth this amount each year. So in year one, you bought a property that's worth $183,600. In year 7, that same property was worth $219,000, $228,000, and you bought a property that was very similar to the first one that was also worth $219,000, $228,000 in that year. Am I explaining that well enough, Jason? Do you understand what I mean by that?
Yep. Okay.
So we're only showing the value of the property for the first 10 years because these are the value of the homes that you're buying. So in year 10, you bought a $240,000 house. In year 9, you bought a $232,000 house and change. Okay. Now, let's take a look at the appreciation you'd see on the first home you bought over the first 10 years. So in year 1, the $183,000 property you bought went up in value 3%, which was $5,508. If you mouse over, you can see the number. If you kind of look at the numbers on here, you can see the numbers too. So the charts are interactive if you want to go look at them.
Making money doing nothing.
Yeah, so basically you own the property and the property value went up, so you just made that much amount of money. In year 2, the property went up a 3% appreciation again, which in this means you went up $5,673. Plus, the second property you bought went up that about 2. So in year 1, you only had this one. In year 2, you have 2 properties, and they each went up this amount. In year 3, you had 3 properties, and each of them went up this amount. In year 4, you had 4 properties, and they each went up this amount, and so on. So that by year 10, you now own 10 properties, and each of the properties went up $7,000 and change. So in that year alone, you made $70,000 from appreciation.
Do you have a chart showing the stacking?
Yes. I got charts coming.
I know.
All right. So
show me the charts.
Charts are coming. I'm trying to build on it so that you understand what's happening. All right. So the amount of debt you're paying down, you basically went out and you got a mortgage for 95% of the value. You put 5% down. So the amount you paid off in debt on this first property in the first year was $2,752. In year 2, you paid off $2,882 in that property. By the time you got to year 10, the property you paid off $4,170 on that property. Now, what's interesting about this? When we looked at this appreciation, this is really depending on the market going up. And we know that markets can go up, they can go down. And so you're not guaranteed by any means to get this amount of money. If the market went up 10%, you did better than this. If the market went down, 5%, you had negative appreciation. Basically, the property's worth less this year than it was last year. Okay. Yeah. What's interesting about debt pay down, though, is if you make the mortgage payment, you do pay down that amount of money. Right. It is as close to the word guaranteed as I would be willing to say without actually saying the word that it's a guaranteed return. Because if you actually make the payments on the loan, that is the amount that you got as a return. Right. Okay. If you don't make the payment, you don't get that return. But it's as close to the word guaranteed as you can say without saying it's a guaranteed return.
Love it. And to me, but 2 things on this I want to talk about real quick. Yep. To me, one of the best parts about this is that after the first year, it ain't even your money.
That's true.
You're getting this debt pay down benefit on somebody else's dime.
Yeah, someone's paying your mortgage for you.
Correct.
Yeah, we're gonna go into a lot of detail on it.
The second thing that I want to mention is, and I know you and I have had conversations about this. You know that I'm doing a little tiny bit of accelerated payoff, and this is not something you advocate.
In fact, I tell you not to do it.
And you've told me not to do it, and I have backed down a little bit. Good. But I'm still throwing $100 a month extra at the mortgages. Okay?
I'd rather see you say that.
I know.
So, but everyone who's listening, I want them to realize too. So Jason brings up a point. He's like, why don't I aggressively pay down this loan, and I will go ahead and just have this money that I could just pay down, and I'll have the property free and clear earlier. And what I would suggest he do instead of doing that is I'd suggest he take the money that he wanted to do it, hoard it in a big pile, and when he finally gets to the point where he has in the big pile enough to pay off the mortgage completely, then you can go ahead and pay it off early. But until then, I'd rather see you cash flush than to have money tied up in equity in a property where if something happened and you needed to get into it, now it's hard to access.
Right.
And the return you're getting is not that great. It's really the interest rate you're paying on your loan. So what you're really saying is I'm investing $100 a month into a 3.75 or whatever your number is, 4.125 return. I'd rather see you take that money and possibly put it into another down payment when you have enough there, or just pay off the whole thing completely if you get to the point where you want to do that.
Right. What I'm doing is I'm balancing those two opposing objectives and doing the same simultaneously because I'm comfortable doing so.
Yeah. Everyone else, please don't do that. So, I get it. When we have this conversation all the time, and this goes to show that you can totally do variations of this and still come out okay. I have very strong opinions about certain things. Sure. I'd rather see you cash rich. I'd rather see you, kind of hoard a big pile of cash. I'm pretty conservative. I like sleeping well at night. And so we talk about that. Okay, moving on. So this is debt pay down. Here's the next one. So in the properties that you're buying, Jason, after all of your expenses, your property taxes, your insurance, your maintenance that we set aside, vacancy on the property. In this case, you're not doing a property manager, but it would be property management if you had that in there. In this case, come year 2, and by the way, year 2 is when we start because you're living in the property for the first year. Right. Well, for the first property you buy, the first year you rent it, you see a positive $738 in cash flow on that property.
Nice.
In year 3, a little over $1,000. In year 4, $1,400, so on until year 10. You're making about $3,806 after all expenses on that property. Okay, that's what you're netting. Positive cash flow, again, after all expenses.
Love it.
Okay, and that's, by the way, just one property. That does not include the property you bought in year 2, the one you bought in year 3, year 4, year 5, year 6, year 7, year 8, 9, 10. And I'm going to show you how those numbers compound. This is just one property's cash flow from year 2 through year 10. Okay, cash flow on one home over 10 years. Okay. Now here's the depreciation calculation. Remember we talked before about, you get a tax benefit for owning rental real estate. In year 2, you don't get it when you own the property and you're living in it. Jason, do you want to talk about why you don't get depreciation on owner-occupant properties?
Because it's not a rental property.
There you go. Basically,
that's the short answer.
Yes. So in this case, basically, we're saying once you start renting it, the government grants you a tax benefit for owning that rental property. It's called depreciation. And so in year 2, you get basically, you subtract out the value of the land, and I think I use either 10 or 15% for the value of land, and then the remaining amount is considered the cost of the building. You can depreciate the cost of the building over 27 and a half years, and so whatever the dollar amount of the building is divided by 27 and a half gives you $5,675 that you can use to offset income on your tax return. Okay? Now, when we take this dollar amount and we multiply it by your effective tax rate, we can see the actual amount of cash flow you receive back either on your tax return or that you can actually offset with exemptions on your income that you're receiving from your job. And you could see this as a monthly amount on your paycheck.
Yep.
But basically the amount you'd get back at the end of the year total in aggregate is $1,475. And that's based on Jason's tax rate of 26%. Yours will be lower in most cases.
Yeah.
Okay. So if it happens to be, 20%, you're probably looking at 20% less than this, which is about $300 less. So you're talking about $1,100 or so if your numbers were similar, but you were in a different tax bracket. Okay. And again, that's from year 2 through year 10 because you only get depreciation once it becomes a rental. And this is on one property. All right. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you the combined cash flow and tax benefit from depreciation that looks like cash flow or cash flow from depreciation total. So I'm going to turn off the total amount here. I'm going to just put down here your cash flow amount. So if you just do cash flow, this is the cash flow chart we had above. Okay. Basically, it shows you the same numbers you had here, down here. So it just shows me your cash flow. Then I'm going to add in the cash flow from depreciation. And that is basically this chart that we just had above. So when you add the both together, you get a combination of $1,475 from the cash flow from depreciation and $738 in cash flow from the property. And if you want to know what those two equal, you turn on the third one and it shows you the sum. And the sum is the orange bar. It shows you the $2,213 is the sum of these other two benefits. And so I could turn off these other ones and just show you the combined total of the cash flow from depreciation and the cash flow on the property. And so in this case, Jason, you're making about $2,200 in the first year you rent the property out from cash flow and cash flow from depreciation. Does that make sense?
Love it.
Okay. And so you can see, you guys can like mouse over and turn these on and off. I want everyone to realize that it's an interactive chart that you can play with your own numbers when you enter in your assumptions above. Okay.
It's kind of cool seeing them all in one place stacked like that, I think.
I agree. Yeah, I totally agree. And being able to turn them on and off and look down and drill down and see where it's coming from, I think is also pretty important.
Yeah, you did a really good job on those.
Thank you. I appreciate you saying that. That's very nice. All right, so this is going to be, I'm going to build up this chart, but it's going to be the total cash returns on a single house over 10 years. So what I'm going to do is toggle all of it off, and then I'm going to build it up together. So how much did we make from appreciation? Well, we made this amount, basically $5,508 in the first year, $5,673 in the second year, and this is the amount of appreciation we got on one house over the 10-year period. Okay? Remember, we paid down debt in the property. We paid down $2,752. I'm going to add these two together, and you're going to see the relative amounts of the debt versus the appreciation. So combined between the two of them, you're seeing, I don't know, $8,000 and change. Okay. Now keep adding on to this. So here's the cash flow numbers. You'll notice cash flow doesn't start until year 2, but you do get debt pay down and appreciation in year 1 because the property value does go up in year 1 because you're living in it. You're just not getting rent on it. And you're also paying down the loan in year 1 because you get that. You're just not getting income on it. It's not until year 2 that you actually get cash flow on it and you have the debt pay down and the appreciation. And remember what else happens in year 2 as well. You get depreciation. You get the tax benefits of doing that. You'll also notice in this chart, I'm not doing the after-tax amount for depreciation.
Right.
I'm showing you the gross amount of depreciation before tax.
Right.
So realize it's really not the cash flow portion of it. It's the amount of income you can offset that I'm including as a gross cash return.
Right.
Okay. So you can see the sum of these: blue, red, green, yellow. Each one. Red is debt pay down, blue is appreciation, and it's the same color throughout. The green is the cash flow, and the yellow is the depreciation. You'll notice the colors are the same from the charts above. Depreciation is yellow, cash flow is green, debt pay down is red, and appreciation is blue. All I did is I took all the different things we showed on these charts above, and I displayed them on a single chart. And then what I did is I took this total amount, and I gave you a sum for all of those. So now it shows you the sum for all of them. And I could turn off all the other ones and just have the sums there to show you what the total benefit of owning the house is. So Jason, you had to come up with 5% down in order to buy this property, right? What's about 5% of $183,000?
I am mathematically challenged, just despite being an accountant. So that's 183.
So it's $9,180.
Yeah.
So you had to come up with about $9,200 approximately in order to buy this property. In the first year, you saw between appreciation, debt pay down, cash flow, and depreciation on the property about $8,260 back.
Right.
Okay? That was just year 1. So in year 1, you almost went really hard, save $1,000. You got all your money back, except the
89%.
89%. Okay? In year 2, you got $14,968 more. So in year 2, you not only got your money back, but you got another, I don't know, $1,000, $5,000 more. Okay?
Nice.
So you're seeing pretty good returns on this whole thing.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So
like it.
Yeah, maintenance reserve on the first property. So this is the money that you're not saving. You should be. So in addition to the cash flow we saw before, remember I'm zooming up here. The cash flow we saw was $738 in year 2 when we started saving it for it. The maintenance on the property that we set aside in year 2, in addition to the $700 and change in cash flow, we've also set aside $2,000 for maintenance on the property. Okay, so $700 in cash flow plus $2,000 in maintenance. If you're buying new construction type properties that are under a warranty for the first year and probably don't have maintenance coming for a while, then really you're just building up your cash buffer, which is one of the reasons why I like new construction. Okay.
Right.
And so this is really your dollar amount that you're saving in maintenance reserve, basically per property. There's some variation on it because the rents are going to be a little different, but basically it's going to be these numbers times the number of properties that you own that year. So if you have 10 properties, you're saving, $20,000 a year for maintenance on all the properties, which you can use money from one to another if you set up your LLCs or whatever you're going to do, personal account, to do it that way. Okay. All right, now I'm going to start talking about, to this point, I basically took the first property you bought and I said, let's look at one property. Now I'm going to take a bigger picture view. I'm going to start adding in additional properties and show you how those work. So this shows you the amount of down payment you needed each year in order to buy the properties. So in year one, you needed $9,180, 5% down of $183,600 in order to buy the first one. The next year, because the property value went up a little bit, you needed more money. You need $94,555. Year three, you need almost $9,800. Year four, you need just over $10,000, $10,300, $10,600, almost $11,000, $11,300, $11,600, almost $12,000. So each year you need that much money in order to acquire the properties. Now, if Jason, for example, you had negative cash flow in here, what I do on this chart, I'm going to go change this, and I'm going to say, hey, listen, you're only getting $1,000 a month in cash flow, for argument's sake. Okay, and then I'm going to zoom down. I'm going to show you that chart again. And on that chart, you basically have negative cash flow now, which we just showed. But on that chart that we just saw, it's showing you both your down payments, which is what it looked like before, but now it's also showing you negative cash flow. So you would need your down payment, plus you need to be able to come out of pocket and put this negative cash flow up in order to feed the property while you held on to it. Now, in markets where you can avoid it, avoid negative cash flow.
Right.
There are some markets where it's going to be near impossible for you to avoid negative cash flow, and then you need to decide whether or not you're willing to invest that money in order to acquire the portfolio you have and feed the properties with negative cash flow.
Right.
If you can avoid it, though, avoid negative cash flow. Okay? So if you look at them together, it's going to show you both of them and show you that you have down payments in blue until year 10, and then you still have negative cash flow year 11 through year, whatever this is here, year 23. Okay? I'm going to go change it back, but I wanted to show you what it looks like when you have negative cash flow on a property and why I do it that way. And the reason I do it that way is so that you can see how much money you'll need in order to do this, including down payment, and if you have negative cash flow, how much more you'll have to invest in addition. Because in some ways, the way I look at it is, if you have a property, you put 5% down, and you have negative cash flow, if you had put 20% down or 25% and you would have had positive cash flow, all the negative cash flow really is deferred down payment. Down payment that if you had put it up above, wouldn't have had negative cash flow. So the negative cash flow you have is deferred down payment that you're now having to pay in over time instead of putting a larger chunk in up front. And that's how I look at it. Okay, so let's get back down here to the numbers. So this is, well, I guess I didn't hit save with the new cash flow. 1,400. Take your time. Oh, let's calculate maybe. There we go. All right, now going back down here. So now it's just showing us the down payment. There's no negative cash flow because we moved it back up to the 1,400 that Jason is getting for the property, or is going to get basically based on current fair market rent. Okay, so if you had negative cash flow, it would have showed there. What I show you in the next chart is the total amount of money you would have needed to invest to do the entire deal. So in this case, in order to acquire 10 rental properties, that if you basically buy one a year using 5% down, at the end of 40-year period, you'll have 10 free and clear rental properties. But in order to buy 10 free and clear rental properties, you would have needed to invest a total of $105,000 and some small change. That's the total amount you would need to invest in order to do that deal. Now, if you're going to go and take $105,000 and you're going to invest it, what kind of return are you going to see? Are you going to be able to live off of that money, Jason, in retirement? Because that's really what we're talking about tonight, right? We're talking about,
well, that's the whole point, yeah.
The Catch Up Nomad model. You know, if you took $105,000 and you put it in the stock market, would you be able to live on $105,000? If you invested $10,000 a year, basically, over 10 years, would you be able to live in retirement on a $10,000 a year investment each year for 10 years? which is what we just said.
Sure, just not for very long.
Okay. Now, if you took the same amount of money and you did Nomad, could you live on that? Let's see. I mean,
let's see.
That's the question of the night.
Correct.
So here's your equity. This shows you how much equity you have, adding up all of the equities for all of the properties. So as property values go up and as your loan gets paid down, the difference between what the property is worth and what the payoff amount of the loan is, basically the difference between those is your equity in the property. And remember, you have 10 of them. So we're going to add up the equity on one and the other and the other and the other and the other until you get to the equity for each of the 10. And so what I will do is I will zoom in here to show you the equity on the first 6 years or so. So in year one, when you buy the property and you put $10,000 down and the property value goes up a little bit, you are seeing about $11,932 in equity on the property. Makes sense. You only own one, and you put down about $9,000 to buy it to begin with, so you didn't get that much equity to begin with. Okay, so that's your total amount of equity. In year two, you now own two properties. You put down almost $20,000 in down payments. I'm rounding a little bit. So basically, you now own $32,000 worth of equity in the properties. Year three, you have $62,000. Year four, you have 105 or 102 rather. In year five, you have 152. In year six, I can't read the number, so I'll just use year five. So by year five, Jason, doing this model, you put up almost $10,000 down payments. You put up about 50 grand in down payments, and you now have $152,000 in equity. So you gained $100,000 in equity by putting up 50 grand in down payments. Is that pretty good?
Works for me.
Are you going to see in the stock market a place where you could put in $50,000 in year one, and then by year five, you have $150,000 in there?
If there is, I'm all ears.
Yeah. Either, right? And so this is the argument. We're basically looking at equity like this and saying, okay, overdoing that. So now let's look at year 10. We're going to look at year 10 through 20 or so. And you'll notice that in year 10, you have almost $600,000 worth of equity, over $500,000 in equity, putting up $100,000 to begin with. And it's $10,000 a year over 10 years. And so we've talked about this, Jason, but we're using in our model the 5% down payment for all 10. Really, for the first one, how much do you have to put up?
What was it, the 9,200?
Well, that's what it is if we put 5% down. But what kind of loan program did you do? Did you have to do a 5%?
I put nothing down. All I had to pay out of pocket was my closing costs.
Yeah, so you had nothing down on the first one. And people, if they're not veterans, they could do USDA and do nothing down on their first one. But you could, but even if you're not going to do USDA, you could do 1% down. So instead of having to come up with $10,000, you can come up with $2,000 down. And then you have still the same benefit. And then the second one, you can put 3% down. And so instead of doing almost 10 grand, you're doing, $6,000. And then on the third one, you can put 3% down. So instead of doing 10 grand, you can do 6 grand again. So really, you could save yourself $4,000 and $8,000. So you could save yourself another, I don't know, what's that? 16,000 of the 100,000 you had to put down, and make it even lighter. And then you do 5% down for the rest. And if you alternate between spouses, you could do 1%, 1%, 3%, 3%, 3%, 3%, and then you start doing your fives. Okay?
Right.
So equity starts growing pretty rapidly here. Once you get to the point where in year 20 to year 25, how much equity do you have? And why? And first of all, why am I even picking year 20? Jason, how old are you again?
39.
So let's pretend you're 40 years old, which is the typical type of catch-up nomad. It could be 35, right. It could be 45, it could be 50 years old, right? But if you're 40 years old, 20 years from now is age 60. Right?
Yeah.
So at age 60, you now have almost $2 million in equity in your properties, assuming you started with just $100,000.
Right.
$10,000 a year for 10 years. You scrimp and you save, or maybe you woke up and you realized, oh my gosh, I'm way behind for retirement. I only have $100,000 saved total. Right? Maybe you're a little bit luckier than you were. And you realize, okay, well, what I'll do is I'm not going to take all the money out of the stock market. I'm going to take one down payment out this year. I'm going to see if James is crazy. I'm going to go buy one property. At the end of the year, you decide, well, James wasn't crazy. This is working out pretty well. I'm going to go buy a second property. Pull out another 10K. And you let your money remain in the stock market until you get your entire real estate portfolio over a decade. So this is not a fast, give me all your money, we're going to make a huge rash decision. We say, listen, buy one property. Stick with me for a year, come to all the classes, figure this stuff out. Tell me if you like it at the end of the year. If you don't like it at the end of the year, you bought a property, you could sell it, you could keep it as a rental, you could do whatever you want. You don't have to keep moving. You don't have to do 10, you don't have to do 20. You can do one. And it's still a good deal. Okay? So you've got this much equity. If you wait till you're age 40 and you wait till you're 65, let's see, where's 25 here? I'll do. So this is year 25. So now you're 65. You have $2.78 million in equity at that point.
Only
better than what you could do in the stock market if you invested $100,000. Well, let's see. We're gonna keep going. But first, let's take a trip down cash flow lane.
Oh. Are we getting into stacking? Are we getting into stacking?
We will get into stacking. Just chill for a second. So basically, a year one, you have no cash flow because you're not renting any properties. The first property you rent in year two, you've got $738 a year in cash flow. Not much. In year three, you've got two properties rented. The sum of all the cash flows for both the properties after all expenses, maintenance, taxes, insurance, vacancy. If you were going to do property management would be included in here too. But since you're managing it yourself, we've used zero for that. All of those numbers, including expenses that go up over time, just like property values and rents do. And we're assuming that all those are scaling at whatever the assumptions were at the top. You have $1,843 in cash flow in year three. You have $3,337 in year four. $5,241 in year five. $75.79 year six. Here's a really interesting one though, Jason. By year seven, the cash flow being thrown off from the property gives you enough for your down payment.
Yep.
So you really don't even need to have the full $100,000. You just need to supplement the difference between whatever you're short from the cash flow on the properties you have.
Right.
It's even easier than I've made it out to be in the charts if you use the cash flow from these properties to reinvest and buy the next property with. Okay?
And just out of curiosity, when you're actually doing this with clients,
yep,
are you not instructing, but encouraging them to, even though there's not a separate LLC that the house is in, it's not a separate business entity and all that.
Yep.
Do you encourage them to treat it, quote, as if it were, and to keep a separate bank account so that they are accumulating this cash and the maintenance expenses and all that was coming out of a separate account? I mean, do you get into that level, kind of into the weeds of encouraging people to track it that aggressively?
I encourage them to track it, but I don't encourage them to have separate bank accounts for each property, unless they're doing LLCs, and then you do need to have separate bank accounts. But if you're doing, basically you're doing a nomad and you're basically using insurance as your asset protection, not putting them in LLCs, you could do it all in one account.
Right.
And then you can manage it all that way.
Right.
Okay. So let's look at cash flow now. So, we're talking about Catch Up Nomad, and let's say you have a, 15 to 20 year time horizon. So basically at year 15, how much cash flow do you have coming in? So Jason, you're 40. 40 plus 15 puts you at age 55, if my math is correct. So if you needed to, in age 55, putting in, the amount of money you did, you'd be throwing off $45,000 a year in cash flow in 15 years from now that you could use for retirement money. So if you had $100,000 sitting in your retirement account now, and you went and you talked to your financial planner, and your financial planner says, you need to be prepared to live off of 4% of that per year, right? The withdrawal rate.
Right.
So 4% of 100,000, if my math is right, is $4,000. So you can either take $100,000 and pull out $4,000 a year, which is what the financial planners recommend you pull out.
Right.
Or you could take that same $100,000, and by year 15, it's throwing off $45,000 a year in passive cash flow and growing. And you have other things going on, which are like debt pay downs increasing, and your appreciation is increasing, and you have tax benefits. So really, correct me if I'm wrong, Jason, but this $45,000 is pretty much going to be tax-free because it's offset by depreciation. Is that fair?
For the most part.
And so you could argue that this is really almost like $60,000 a year in income that you'd have to pay taxes on.
And it's also worth noting, by the way, that that number is the current, roughly anyway, the current ballpark figure for the median U.S. income.
45,000?
Somewhere around there, yeah.
Okay, that's pretty interesting.
Yeah.
So if you have, so this is 15 years out, right? You're 40 years old, you wait 15 years, you're now making 45,000. What if, Jason, what if you could say, listen, I'm willing to work till I'm 60, right? I wasn't planning for retirement. I'm kind of behind.
Mm-hmm.
But hey, I'm willing to put in 20 more years, 40 to 60. What happens then? Well, at year 60, age 60 rather, you're making $72,000 a year in cash flow.
Yep.
A little bit better.
Yep.
Okay.
You know what's interesting about that? I taught a seminar this morning. Met a guy that was there in attendance, 77 years old, retired IRS employee. So he draws a pretty healthy government pension. He was one of those evil auditors. Okay, he's a revenue agent.
Okay.
And he retired in 1992.
Wow.
Okay, with a government pension.
That's 25 years ago.
I know. He's been working every year since then, part-time as a tax preparer, because it's not enough money.
His pension wasn't enough?
His pension wasn't enough money.
Yeah.
And even when Social Security kicked in when he hit 65,
wow,
wasn't enough money. We actually talked about this after the seminar. We had a conversation.
Wow.
And 77 years old, and he's still working through the misery of tax season as a tax preparer.
Yeah.
Just because he needs the money.
Yeah, that's crazy.
Now, when you compare that, and the guy's got Social Security and a government pension and a paycheck basically from his self-employment business, which adds $30,000-$40,000 a year. He has to keep doing that to maintain his lifestyle.
Yeah, that's really insane.
Compare that to this. Which would you rather do?
I'd rather do this.
Yeah, exactly.
So here's another interesting one. So you're 40 now. What's the typical age for retirement? When I say what age do people typically retire, Jason, what's the number that comes to your mind?
Most people's about 65.
65. So you add 40 plus 25 and you get 65. So 25 years in the future, and you're making a six-figure income passively from this, 103,581.
Yep. And these are in today's dollars, right?
Those are in...
Or are these inflation-adjusted dollars?
Well, they're inflated dollars, so it really is lower than that in today's dollars.
Right.
Right? But it is inflated dollars. So if you see inflation, those are the numbers you're seeing.
Yep.
Let me talk to you about the rest though. Okay. So I don't want to get you too excited, but if you're 30 to 40, you can look at what the numbers are. By year 40, Jason's looking at about $353,000 a year in passive cash flow from buying these properties. Okay. It's assuming the properties we talked about earlier are the same assumptions. You buy more expensive properties. Well, let's say it this way. If you buy properties with better cash flow, these numbers get better. If you buy more expensive properties, the equity is going to improve later too. Okay. So let's take a look at equity and cash flow. So this is the two charts. This is the chart for cash flow that we just talked about before. You could see that in year 10, you're seeing 81,000. Year 10, oh, this is the sum. So basically, this shows you not how much you're making per year, but how much you've made in total, in aggregate, adding all up the years to this date. So if we look at year 10, year 10 earlier. So in year 2, you made $738, $25.81, 5, 9, 18, 11, whatever it is. By the time you get to year 10, you made, So year 10 is, it looks like 81,000 and change is how much you made in total cash flow. But if you add up cash flow plus equity, the amount of equity you have in a property, this gets dwarfed because the equity you're seeing in aggregate is a lot more than the cash flow. So right here, the 10 houses, cash flow wise, you made almost 82,000. The equity on those houses looks like in year 10, well, I don't know what that number is. I can't read behind it.
That's got the zoom reset thing there.
Yeah, let's see. We'll do that.
You're 10.
I still can't see it. All right, year 10. Year 10 is $586,928. You add back in the cash flow, and it adds in an additional $80,000 or so. So between the two of them, you've just like crushed it on a $100,000 initial investment, especially when you could have taken part of the cash flow from here and used that for down payments. So you really even wasn't the full $100,000.
So I want to summarize this.
Yep.
$100,000 initial investment over the period of 10 years.
Yep.
Okay. I now have, after purchasing the 10th house.
Yep.
I now have over $500,000 in equity.
Yep.
And I'm throwing off enough cash flow to replace most people's jobs.
Well, no, because in year 10, it's only $21,770.
Okay. No, I'm sorry. At year 20, it becomes, is that where it fell over?
Year 20, it's $72,000.
Okay.
At year 15, it was $45,000.
Okay, so about year, so yeah, sorry. So at year 15.
Let's look at year 15.
Yeah, let's look at that.
So year 15, you have $261,000 that you've made total in cash flow.
Yep.
In year 15, it is $45,000 in cash flow per year.
So you're replacing a median income job,
yep.
And you're also a paper millionaire.
In year 15?
Yeah.
Year 15, you have over $1 million in equity.
Yeah.
So right here is year 15, $1.19 million in equity.
Yeah.
Yep. So, I mean, that's how you catch up for retirement, right?
Yeah.
That's between the two of them. All right, let's keep going. So how does Nomad compare to investing in stocks?
Sorry.
Let's see how it goes. So basically, in year 10, if you waited to year 10, you would have invested about $105,238. And by the way, if you have negative cash flow, if you're up above, your assumptions mean that you have negative cash flow, the amount you invested includes your down payment money and any negative cash flow. I want to make sure I'm clear on that, because when you're thinking about it in terms of Nomad, you're sort of like double penalizing Nomad by including negative cash flow as an amount invested. In the stock market, we're saying you invest the down payment and the negative cash flow. So it's a single benefit, but it's not, you're double dipping in a negative way, in a more conservative way, I should say, when you're doing Nomad this way. So anyways, $105,238 is the amount total you had invested. The stocks, you invested in stocks at a 10% return per year, you would have made $180,296 total. So you're 105 plus another $75,000 in return. Whereas equity in Nomad at that point would have been $586,000, almost $587,000, and the Nomad cash flow total for that point, up to that point, not per year, would be $81,000, almost $82,000. So Nomad is $488,000 better than investing in the stock market in that case, over a 10-year period. Jason, if you have 15 years, Nomad is $1.1 million better. In year 20, it's $2 million better. In year 25, it's $3 million better. And in year 30, it's $4.2 million better to have done Nomad.
Yeah.
Okay. So you guys can look at that chart and see how much stocks would have grown. And remember, we picked a number that was more optimistic for the stock market. What was your, originally you told me it was going to be like 8% for your...
7.
7 for the stock market return?
That's the number that I use.
All right, so if I do 7% here, and I jump back down to that chart, yeah, so it's even better. I mean, you instead of having the 180,000 or whatever it was here, you have 153,000.
Mm-hmm.
So the stock market return changes to be whatever the 7% is, does your numbers and tells you. So basically at the end, it's $4.8 million better for doing Nomad. Let's change it back just so we have it there.
Do you remember your old Learn to Be Rich game that you programmed years ago?
Yeah.
One of the things that you had in the game was somewhat similar modeling, right? Because part of the game, it was similar to like the Kiyosaki cash flow game in some respects. And you modeled some of this similar type of stuff. And you wrote that game back before the market tanked, right?
That's true.
And yeah, so the market tanked in '08. We've seen this massive, I can never remember which one's bear and which one's bull, but this massive up run in the market the past several years. And so people might look at this and go, oh man, over the last 8-9 years, the stock market's been doing 15-25% a year.
Sure.
And so they may think about that and look at it within this isolated short time period.
Yep.
Right. And they may think that that's what I need to be running these numbers on, because there are some pundits that say, oh, the stock market run is going to last for the foreseeable decades. Okay. Yeah, good idea. Even if you increase it to 15%, Nomad is still a superior model.
Yeah, instead of being $4 million better, it's still only 1.5.
Only.
Yeah. So, I mean, you do better with Nomad. And eventually, by the way, I'll show you this, but eventually, if the stock market's better, when you lose all of your leverage on the real estate, the stock market will be a better return if you're at 15%. Which I can talk to you about when we do another class. I'm not going to go into a lot of detail tonight, but it's better for a long ways. And the chance of you getting a 15% return on the stock market over any prolonged period of time is almost zero.
Right.
And I will tell you that the numbers we use for Nomad, and you're welcome to change them to whatever numbers you want. That's one of the reasons why I wanted to open up the calculator so that you guys can try this. But one of the reasons why you guys can put whatever numbers you want in there is you will see the numbers we're using for Nomad are super conservative. Right. We're not using 5% a year. We're not using 10% a year for appreciation. We're using 3%. We're using inflation rate. So, all right, so let's continue on with this. So basically, you have that chart there that shows you the difference. We're back to normal, what we did before. Stock market compared to Nomad. This shows you graphically the chart. So this is the houses, cash flow and equity numbers, which we kind of went into detail. You just see what the sum between those are. This is what your stock market balance would look like if you invested all this money. And you'll see here there's a curve. This is the time when you stop adding money, and this is just the regular 10% return you're seeing on the money. But then you can compare it to the houses and equity. And houses and equity outperform the stock market by a lot. Okay? You just put your mouse over and see the difference between them.
By the way, this is, I think we talked about this a few weeks ago. I still haven't finished writing that Medium blog post, but I'm writing an article about this for James. And I'm focusing on this right here. And I just, I talk to people because I'm in the tech startup world because of another business I've got. And I talk to people about angel investing and, their expectations and the realities. And it is not uncommon for a wealthy individual, right, that is investing in tech companies, startups. The average typical investments are $25,000 or $50,000 checks that they're writing. Okay.
Yep.
That's what we see in the Seattle area. Down in Silicon Valley, it's a little bit more, but that's what we see here. And I even had a conversation with somebody on a flight recently that was sitting next to me on the airplane about this. But you take $25,000 that you're going to sink into a tech startup, okay, as somebody that already has a decent net worth of maybe $1 million, $2 million, okay. And you basically look at it as your ROI long-term on that money in the tech world is essentially zero because 90% of tech startups go to zero, right? And you're just burning money. And I talk to some of these people, and even though I have a tech startup and I'm asking them for their investment money, right? I also have the conversation with them. I would never give money to a tech startup because you should put it in real estate because it's going to do this.
Yeah, that's pretty interesting. And we talked about this, the article you're going to write. So
yeah.
All right, so moving on. So we gotta watch our time here. So this is a summary, year 40 snapshot. So up here, if we looked at basically year 40, this is what these numbers should show. And it shows that the total for Nomad is almost $10 million. And the total for the stock market, if you were able to get a 10% return in year 40, is $3.2 million, or 3.1 in high change. Okay.
Which, by the way, that is right. That right there is roughly the 2.5 to 4 million range is the target number that a lot of financial planners will tell you that you need to get to in your retirement portfolio to maintain a standard of living that a lot of people are at right now.
So here's the challenge. That's 40 years in the future.
Correct.
So if you're starting at age 40,
yeah,
that's 80.
Right.
So if you only put $100,000 in, you have to wait till you're 80 in order to get to the number that they tell you need. And this is the one, same chart, except I adjusted it for 3% inflation. So Nomad with 3% inflation would be worth about $3.1 million in today's dollars 40 years from now.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so think about it this way. You're basically taking $100,000 in today's dollars in order to get $3 million in today's dollars 40 years from now.
Yep.
Okay, and then the stock market total is about $1 million, a little less than $1 million,
yep.
Inflation adjusted. And the interesting thing to point out is it's about a third. When you go out 40 years, it works out to be about a third in order to get the conversion back to today at a 3% inflation. Okay. This shows you if you do stock market versus Nomad without touching principal, and what those numbers look like. I'm not going to go into detail with this. We cover this in a different class, and it takes a lot longer to explain than we have right now. This is another version of that slide. Different slides there. So here's cash flow. I want to show you cash flow because I want to review it, and then I want to show you a couple of slides down, I guess. But so the cash flow on this, in year 20, we're talking about a $72,000 per year cash flow. We're going to go down here and look at some of this stuff here. Skip that one. This is how much money you'd need to be earning in order to buy those houses, Jason. So you need to be making about almost $2,600 a month, assuming you have no other debt, in order to be able to qualify for the first purchase. And it goes and it peaks out. Oh, it looks like it peaks out in year 7. So in year 7, you need to be making about $3,500 a month, assuming you have no other debt. If you have more debt, you need to earn more money. Almost twice as much for how much monthly debt you have. So if you have a $200 a month car payment, you need to be making about $400 more per month in order to handle that car payment. And then it goes down over year 10. There's something I wanted to show you. Oh, here it is. This is what I want to show you. All right, Jason. So here's the question. You're 25 years out in your case, and we're just going to assume it's 10 years out. Let's say you wanted to retire, a year 11 from now. Mm-hmm. And instead of waiting and buying your properties and just kind of letting cash flow, let's say I want to maximize cash flow. I want to actually take properties I have, maybe sell off 1 or 2 of them, and pay off a property, to make it free and clear, and just kind of keep some other properties that way. What if I did that? What if I sold off properties and took the money and either paid down properties to make them free and clear to improve cash flow? Well, this is what this chart shows, and it's going to take me a minute or two to explain it. But once I explain it, I think you'll kind of follow along here. So basically, these are the 10 properties you own, kind of going across. All right. This is the year. So year 11. Property number 1 that you own, you've got $111,000 in equity in year 11 in the first property that you bought. Okay, so if you took that property, you kept it, you kept property number 2, which you have $102,000 in equity. But let's say you sold off property number 3. You had $94,000 in equity in that. You took that property and you sold it off, and then you used it to kind of pay off the mortgage on another property. So you keep property number 4, $85,000, $75,000 number 5. You pay off number 6, and then you. Let me think about this. Did I say that right?
You sell 2 and you have 2 free and clear.
Oh, okay. I strike that. This is what happens. You sell this one. You sell this one. You use it to pay off number 3. So you no longer have a mortgage on number 3.
Oh, okay.
Number 4, you actually sell off, and you pay off number 6. So now you have 2 free and clear properties. Then you keep this one, this one, this one, and this one because there's nothing for you to use to pay them off. So now you have 2 free and clear properties, and you've kept 6.
So okay? you sell 4 houses in year 11.
3, 4. Yep, you sold 4 houses in year 11. You end up paying off 2. So you have 2 free and clear, no mortgages on them, and now you have 6 properties total, 2 free and clear, and 4 additional properties that didn't have enough equity for you to pay something off.
Yeah.
Okay. So now you have $36,000 in cash flow. What did you have in cash flow
for year 11?
Yeah, let's go see. Year 11 cash flow. So in year 11, you used to have.
It's a lot of charts.
There are a lot of charts. So in year 11, you started off with $26,000 a year in cash flow. So by doing this kind of optimization, you increase your cash flow from $26,000 a year to $36,000. Okay. Let's look at the next year. Let's actually jump ahead. So if you jump ahead to year, you're 40 years old now. Let's say you want to retire at 55. So that's 15 years in the future. So you sell off this one. You pay off this one. You sell off this one. You pay off this one. You sell off these two, you pay off this one, you sell off this one, you pay off this one, and you keep this one. So now you have 4 free and clear properties, 5 properties total. 1, 2, 3, 4 free and clear, and you kept this one. Now you have $70,000 in free and clear, well, just total cash flow from your free and clear properties and the one that has a mortgage on it. You have $70,000 in monthly income coming in year 15.
Yeah.
So in year 15, you would have had about 45,000. So you increased it from 45,000 to 75. Isn't that what I said?
Yep.
Okay.
70.
70,000. Okay. So now let's say you do 20 years out. So Jason, you're 40 years old. Let's say you want to retire at 60. Sell this one. Pay off a mortgage, pay off another mortgage, sell this one, pay off a mortgage, sell this one, pay off a mortgage, pay off a mortgage, keep this one, keep this one. So now you have 5 free and clear properties, 7 total. You have now $109,000 in cash flow. So 109 compared to, oops, overshot. And this is in year 20 versus 72. So you can significantly improve your cash flow, speed up Catch Up Nomad by selling off some properties and paying off some mortgages.
Yep.
And then this chart shows you basically year 21 through 20 or through 30. But if you basically are at 40 years old and you want to retire at age 65, you can retire at age 65 by doing this model and have $160,000 in cash flow. You will have 7 free and clear properties at that time.
Yep.
So you start with 10. You end up selling off some in order to pay off the final balances of those mortgages. You end up having 7 free and clear properties, making $159,000 in cash flow.
Sounds a heck of a lot better than relying on Social Security.
I totally agree, right? Yep. And so that's the way to kind of look at that. We're not covering return on investment, return on equity. That's a totally different class. But we do have some slides on that here and how that all works, including cash on cash return and how that compares to the stock market. So Jason, that was basically us walking through your analysis of Catch Up Nomad.
Yep.
Was there a calculation we were supposed to do differently?
You wanted to run if I did a new construction for my next property at about at a 2.25.
And what's the rent on that?
That's going to be probably about $1,500. It's not going to be
not much more in rent at all.
No, it's not.
Okay, so that's going to hurt. So basically, we'll do that. It's 5% down payment. HOA is $250 a year. We said it's going to go up 3%. Maintenance is going to be a little bit lower, but we'll keep it at 12. Be a little bit more conservative, and let's just run it again. See what happens to the numbers. So come down here. Your value of each house is going to be higher. Your appreciation is going to be higher. Your debt pay down is going to be higher. You have a larger loan. You have negative cash flow. So you need to fund this one if you were going to do it. And I think your rent's probably low. I think you can get more than $100 a month more for a brand new house. But let's say it wasn't $1,600 negative for the first year, almost $1,300 for the second year, third year, almost $1,000 for fourth year. It takes you to year 7 in order to become positive. Okay, so you're going to see some negative cash flow. You get depreciation, which is going to offset that. When you look at the sum of your positive cash flow, or your negative cash flow in this case, and your depreciation, you're actually positive. Let me talk about this very briefly. It's a really important concept.
Okay.
So you were negative $1,600 in cash flow, okay? But you got tax benefits of $1,800 and change at your 26% tax rate. So really, when you combine your negative $1,600 in negative cash flow and your $1,800 in depreciation benefit, when you really add those up at the end of the year, the money you get back in your taxes and the money you had to pay out in order to support the property are almost a wash. You make $180 positive on that.
Right.
You're not really feeding the property if you take into account your tax benefit as well. Okay. Right. Now, in the ideal world, if you can do this and have positive cash flow, always do positive cash flow. right? We talk about this as ways to kind of overcome this in markets where you can't overcome it, where you can't get positive cash flow. But if you can avoid it, avoid it. So when you really look at those total, you really do have positive when you combine cash flow and your depreciation. Okay. Here's your kind of numbers. So this is the chart where we showed you before. You have negative cash flow in these properties going out to year 15, and it gets progressively lower after year 11. That's your negative cash flow numbers for all the properties combined. This is all of your down payments for all the properties combined, and this is the sum of all of them total. You can see your total investment. You end up coming in about $181,000 in this particular case. Your equity at the end, though, is $7 million, a little bit more than before because you have more properties that are worth more.
Right.
And then your cash flow on these properties, what were we talking about? Like year 20?
We were looking at like year 15 being about 45,000.
Okay, so year 15 in this case, because you had negative to start with, is only 18,000.
Yeah.
Your cash flow is worse. But let's see if we can speed it up. Let's see if the equity later actually helps us. So you have $7 million in equity, you have $3 million in cash flow later on. So right here, because you have the negative cash flow, it's still better though than the stock market.
Yeah.
Okay. Nomad's still better than the stock market. You have 10.5 million versus 5.1 million. Yeah. And by the way, this is larger because you were basically investing that negative cash flow you had.
Yeah, you have a higher investment into the whole process.
Yep. And so it shows you that short term it's worse because you're basically having the negative cash flow return. And then here, let's go down to that table. Oh, by the way, you need to earn more money in order to handle that negative cash flow.
Yep.
So you'll need to earn more to do that. And then here's the paying off the houses part. So in year 15, you can bump it up to $68,000 a year. You'll end up with 4 free and clear properties that you keep 5 with, and you'll make almost $70,000 a year, and that's at age 55.
Yeah.
So doing that model, it works out to be pretty interesting. And
go year 25.
Year 25 was $160K in cash flow.
So that actually works out about $10,000 a year better.
There you go. So it's $10,000 a year better if you're willing to deal with that negative cash flow. And you have 7 free and clear properties, same as before. It just works out to be a little bit better cash flow, partially because it's a little bit more expensive property and they're going up from that 1,500.
Now, just to show the utility of the calculator, rerun it and say the rent's like $1,650.
Okay, so this is 160 at year 25, right?
Right.
1,650.
Yeah. So, and then show me the change in cash flow early on for the first 12 years, and then the 25-year. Yeah, see, there's not even negative anymore. That
not
takes
negative
care
at all. Yeah, so basically it shows you that, and you'll see that there's no negative cash flow on any of the properties.
Nope.
Oh, I'm sorry, there is. And you can do this. It's negative 46.
Well, all right.
Yeah, it's very small, but it shows you that. And then your total amount invested is 129, less than the 180 you had before.
Yep.
Go down here, you can see the difference between these two things. But the one I'm going to look at, what did we have before?
The 25-year number went from 160,000 to 182.
Yep. So what's just crazy, you can do these calculations and plan for your retirement doing that. So now looking over it, I've seen some people kind of popping in and out. Anyone have any questions about this stuff? I haven't seen any messages all night.
No, me neither.
Any questions, but people are allowed to do it, whatever they want to do.
How would you suggest people actually use this as a planning aid for the time being while you're still working on the more complex advanced calculator?
I think what you do is you take the property you're about to buy and said, okay, if I was going to buy 10 of these, one each year for the next 10 years, what would it look like? Would I want this to be compounding? And if you're not okay with it compounding, then maybe you should look at something else. Unless you're saying, okay, this is the exception. I'm going to buy this one unusual property because it's the one I'm moving back into, or whatever the reason is, right? Why you're okay with doing this one. Then you run the numbers on it and you see how it would perform. I think that's really reasonable.
And then, I know how I would do it, but just for the sake of people watching, how would you suggest people that are looking at multi-unit properties take into account the fact that it's a multi-unit? How do we accommodate for that fact?
Well, because you're not able to buy multifamily for all 10 units, I would use what your single family is going to do, but then realize that you're early on cash. I'd run it to make sure that you knew what your cash flow is on this, right? So you could see what it looks like.
And look at the early year charts.
Yes. But then I would go and look at what a single family home would be if you're starting to buy those at your second purchase or third purchase, which is where you're typically going to lose your ability to buy multifamily.
Okay.
Because you could buy VA for the first one, maybe the first two. You can buy FHA for maybe the first one, maybe the second or third one if you had VA already. But after that, your ability to buy multifamily goes away.
Okay, but with the ability to buy a multifamily for your first or second house, does change the equation slightly and is worth looking at, I think.
Yeah, it improves your cash flow a lot of times, right?
Yeah.
And so you'll have like a little bump in cash flow, and then realize that your numbers, because you're assuming that they're all the single family homes, are going to be better. And this is really why, as soon as I started building this, I knew I needed to build a better calculator. And it's just not built yet, or I'd give you access to that one. Really, the best calculator I have is this one, which does the cascading of 10 properties over 10 years and shows you how the return looks over 40.
And
but eventually,
what does somebody need to do to get access to this?
Well, right now it's open. So it's open to everything.
Awesome.
I probably will. I'm not sure if I'm going to keep it open or not. I need to think about this weekend at the retreat, right? So I'm going to go and think through what it looks like and what I should open up and what I should lock down for premiums. The premium members, I think, are going to have access to the checklist and some additional like super advanced content. But I think I'm going to open up the calculator to everybody and open up like the overwhelming majority of videos to everybody. That's where I'm leaning toward right now, but I don't know for sure.
I think people would appreciate that, especially because of the fact that in so many of these classes, you are referencing other classes, right? Because there is a lot to, there's a lot of material. So somebody that wants to, we keep talking about these loan programs, right? Yeah. And so people really need to go watch, financing.
Yeah, totally.
So, yeah.
All right, cool. Well, it's 8 o'clock. It doesn't look like there's any questions. So I'm going to sign off, but I really do appreciate you going over your numbers. And I think it's pretty insightful to see how your numbers kind of compare on these properties and looking through how you would perform, because we've never really done this together. So I really appreciate you taking time to do that.
No problem. Thanks. And it's always nice to get your input, obviously. I mean, because you're not only a friend, but a mentor and advisor on this all as well. And so every time I pick up at least one tiny little new thing that or way to think and look at some of the things. So it's always helpful for me as well.
Yeah, I definitely appreciate it too, and you're very welcome. So thanks everybody for listening in, and appreciate it. Thanks again, Jason, for coming on. I will talk to y'all soon. And Jason, I don't think I'm calling you after this tonight. I think we're good to go, right?
Yeah.
Okay, cool.
All right, have a good night.
Thanks again, everybody. Have a good night. Appreciate it. Bye-bye for now.
Bye-bye.